The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So one of the most important sort of components of social democracy, which is the political ideology that I most align with, is that we see certain areas of life, certain areas of an economy, as deserving of being outside of the for-profit system. Social democracy is capitalism, but it is capitalism with limits. It's capitalism with the fruits of that system reinvested significantly in making sure that no one falls too low in terms of their status in the world, in the economy, in society. And there are certain areas that often come up as deserving to be outside of that for-profit system. Healthcare is very often one. Education is very often one. And one that has been more discussed lately, but less frequently, is doing something about housing. How should we deal with housing? And with so much negative news, like a lot of the stuff we're talking about is bad things that have happened. I have today just a really great policy proposal to discuss from Bernie Sanders relating to housing. It's his Housing for All plan that he released yesterday. And there's a view about housing that is we should totally decommodify housing completely, remove it from the marketplace, set up some kind of land value tax that would equal the rental value of properties so that people can still own private property. We're not saying no more ownership of private property, real estate, that being. But seeking rent on property will be pointless because whatever amount of rent you earn, you will have to pay a land value tax equivalent to that. Now, potentially you would still get the value of owning the property, but you would get that either way. Now, there are also, that understandably will sound extreme to some people in the audience. There are less extreme versions than totally socializing ownership of real estate, of all housing. And the truth is that if you hear me talking about this and you say, David, you're not going far enough. We should decommodify all housing and put a land value tax equivalent to the rental value of any property. That's not going to happen anytime soon. I think most people would agree, whether you like that or not, that's a debate, but it's not happening anytime soon. So the immediate thing that we should look at doing is what is actually doable, which is socially democratic programs that will seriously deal with homelessness and the rising cost of living across the United States. Bernie Sanders has now released such a proposal, and it's a very solid one, and I want to talk about it with you today. The premise is that we have a situation where it's frankly outrageous that we have homelessness in the United States. We're a rich country. We have the money. Financially, we can end homelessness in the United States. We should consider homes, a place to live, a right. Cost of living is out of control, rent seeking and gentrification at the hands of wealthy developers and landowners and rich people. It hurts so many people. And Bernie Sanders' plan deals with a lot of this. Now, I'm just going to give you some of the highlights. I know some people will say I missed some important elements of this. There are more than 30 provisions, but I want to focus on some of the important ones from Bernie's Housing for All proposal. There will be nearly $1.5 trillion spent over 10 years to build and renovate nearly 7.5 million affordable housing units in mixed income developments, as well as $400 billion for 2 million mixed income social housing units for desegregation and integration. Boston actually does some of this, where affordable housing units are placed. You might have a 12-unit development, and a certain number of those are designated affordable, which helps to integrate rather than segregate people on the basis of income. It's not perfect, but it does do that to a great degree. Bernie would expand USDA Section 515 by $500 million to build affordable units in rural areas, as well as protect affordable units, existing affordable units. Very important. You know, we talked about how can Democrats appeal to rural voters. I'm going to deal with this more on tomorrow's show as well. This is a great idea to go along those lines. Indian housing block grants will be increased to $3 billion in total funding. There will be $70 billion allocated to repair and update public housing, including high-speed broadband, which is important. We've talked about broadband as having it versus not having it is increasingly a segregating factor economically. The Faircloth Amendment will be repealed. That amendment prevents building new public housing in certain situations. Via GND, the Green New Deal, that is, there will be the electrification and decarbonization of public housing, which is both good for the climate and also good for the people who are in public housing. Section 8 rental assistance will be fully funded at the rate of $410 billion over 10 years. Makes sense. There will be a strengthening of the Fair Housing Act and the addition of a non-discrimination law. This small area fair market rent rule will be expanded, and there will be $2 billion via the USDA combined with $6 billion via HUD for a first-time homebuyer program. First-time homebuyer programs have existed for a long time, but the idea is let's increase it, let's strengthen it in order to deal with the high cost of living that still keeps people who are just a little bit too wealthy to qualify for some of these programs from buying. We can enable them to become first-time home buyers as well, and then end the mass sale of mortgages to Wall Street. This is something a lot of people don't even know happens, but very often there are lots of banks who you will take out a mortgage with them, and very soon thereafter, they will sell the mortgage to a big Wall Street firm. This is an extraordinarily speculative activity. It doesn't benefit the consumer, and many people don't even know it happens because often the originating bank will continue servicing the loan. So what's not often discussed and may not be obvious to those slamming Bernie for wanting to, quote, spend your money with a proposal like this because people haven't earned it, as we often hear from right-wingers. There's a morality argument to make, which is that we are an extraordinarily rich country. Ending homelessness is merely a matter of deciding to end it, not a matter of having to figure out really complicated ways to do it. We know exactly how to do it. Let's say you don't care about the morality. Homelessness has insane economic costs that are, quote, socialized among all of us. Homeless people are more likely, for a variety of reasons, to end up in the emergency room uninsured. That costs you money. Homeless people are more likely to get arrested for marginal crimes that are associated with homelessness and that fill jails, costing us tax dollars. We could go into many examples of that, and we have, but that costs you money. Homeless people have more difficulty finding jobs. Not having an address makes it harder to find a job. Not having a stable place to live makes it harder to keep a job and to do well in that job, meaning that homeless people don't earn wages, meaning they don't pay taxes into state and local governments, which is not good for any of us. Being homeless is really expensive for society, and providing not just a home, but I would argue also medical care, as we've talked about for the last 10 years on the show, is cheaper for you in the long run. If you don't care about the morality of it, if you don't care about the people as people, then maybe you care about the finances of it, and it will save you money to do something like what Bernie Sanders is proposing here. The other financial thing here is that lots of these components that Bernie proposes are what we call demand-side stimulus. Construction, energy retrofits, service providers of all kinds are involved, companies of all kinds are involved. That is an entire additional front of economic stimulus that is in addition to everything else that we're talking about. And so on all fronts, this really makes sense. It's a great plan. No plan is perfect, but I hope that other candidates will develop similar plans, and that if we get a Democratic president replacing Donald Trump, that this is one of the first things they deal with, because it will be good not only for the homeless people that will directly benefit, this will be good for the economy, this will be good for neighborhood safety, this will be good in every way that we can imagine. Corey Lewandowski is Donald Trump's former campaign manager. He testified, as I told you, in front of a House Judiciary Committee. This is being called a sort of impeachment hearing, even though it's not really that, and it's not going to lead to impeachment. And I already gave you my criticism of the hearing itself yesterday. But today I want to talk about the controversy over whether networks like CNN and others should even be willing to host Corey Lewandowski after he testified. He said during his testimony he has no obligation to tell the truth to the media. He was immediately booked on CNN multiple times right after testifying that he has no obligation to tell the truth to the media. But good for CNN host Alisyn Camerota, who I believe is actually formerly a Fox News host. Corey Lewandowski was truly embarrassed on live television. Now, there's a caveat to that word, embarrassed. I don't know that Corey Lewandowski, much like Donald Trump, is capable of feeling shame. So what I mean when I say he was embarrassed is, to anyone who has a proper barometer for what should cause one to feel shame. Corey Lewandowski was embarrassed on live television by Alisyn Camerota. I think if you ask him, he won't feel any shame. I don't think he's able to feel that. He tried the no collusion, no obstruction line. This is a talking point that all of these Trumpists have been using since the Mueller report came out. And Alisyn Camerota says, no, 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 that is not what the Mueller report said. And then it's immediately revealed that Corey Lewandowski hasn't even read the Mueller report. He's lecturing Alisyn Camerota on what's in the Mueller report, even though he hasn't read it. Here's here's the first clip. It's really entertaining.
So you confirmed that you were asked to obstruct justice.
No, Alisyn, please. That's not what I confirmed at all. By the way, the Mueller report was very clear. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction.
That's not what the Mueller report said, Corey.
It absolutely says that. And
Corey,
you should read the page that states that on. And Bob Mueller
wait a second, Corey. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Time out. Did you read the Mueller report?
No, I never did.
Then how do you know what it says?
Because the members of Congress were very clear about what was in that report yesterday. And so I'm reiterating what they stated.
No, Corey, sorry.
Did you read the report?
Corey, of course I had to read the report.
You read the entire report?
Corey, of course I had to read the entire report. And let me tell you what it said.
Tell me.
There were 10 different examples of obstruction of justice in there.
That's not what it said. It did not say there were 10 examples of obstruction. Alisyn, you're being disingenuous.
Corey?
Of course, Alisyn Camerota is correct. I believe there were 14 possible obstructive acts, of which the 3 requirements were met on, I believe it's 8 of the 14 obstructive acts. And it's interesting that Corey Lewandowski is choosing to use the word disingenuous. There's this Trumpist who calls into my show named Jimmy from Philly. And he'll call in when I take live calls. And every time I say something he doesn't like or agree with, he says I'm being disingenuous. This has become almost like a reflexive meme for Trumpists, where if you call someone disingenuous, they circumvent having to discuss the actual truth or falsity of anything just by saying the person is being disingenuous and therefore they don't deserve to be listened to. That's exactly what Corey Lewandowski is trying to do here. And I'd love to say, wow, Alisyn Camerota really did something amazing here. This is just basic journalism. It's just happening so infrequently that in a way we've become unaccustomed to it. But this is exactly the way that these lying, I mean, he admitted that he lies to media during his hearing under oath. Let's take a look at how it continued. He seems to say, okay, those are obstructive acts, but that didn't come from the Mueller report, which of course it did.
Here they are. Let me pull them up on the screen for you since you didn't read the Mueller report.
Put the Mueller report up on the screen, please.
Here we go.
That's not the Mueller report,
Here are the
Alisyn.
examples.
Alisyn,
when the president asked Comey to let the Flynn investigation go. When he tried to stop Sessions' recusal. That's the one that you were involved in. You may want to read that part. When he fired Comey. When the president tried to remove Mueller. When the president tried to get Sessions to limit the probe. That's another one you were involved in. When he obscured the purpose of the Trump Tower meeting. When he asked Sessions to reverse his recusal. Asking him again to deny attempts to remove Mueller. Trying to influence cooperation of witnesses, including Flynn, Manafort, and Cohen. Those are just some of the examples that scores of legal experts say are obstruction of justice.
How can legal experts make a determination when they're unfamiliar with all of the facts of the case? That is so disingenuous to go and make a predetermination as a, quote, legal expert without having the opportunity to hear both sides of the case.
There it is again, disingenuous, attacking the character and motives of people because you don't like the facts that they're presenting to you. What is he even talking about? People who haven't heard the facts? The Mueller report said that the threshold for obstruction was met on 8 of those possible obstructive acts. Let's look at just a little bit more of this.
How is that not a predetermination against this president?
Because
it's
it lays
very
it out,
disingenuous.
Corey. It lays it out in the Mueller report, all of the examples that any regular citizen would have been charged and convicted of if they were not a sitting U.S. president. You know that part, right?
I don't know that to be true. What I do know is that Attorney General Barr, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, decided that there was no obstruction. Mm-hmm. And I believe in Attorney General Barr, unless you're saying that Attorney General Barr is not a qualified, competent individual, that he and the Deputy Attorney General...
This is a technique that they love. You aren't saying that William Barr is unqualified or incompetent, are you, Alisyn Camerota? But the issue was never qualifications or competency with William Barr. It's that Barr is compromised, Barr is partial, Barr is biased, and he was brought in specifically as the hatchet man to prevent anything from moving forward on the off chance that there was the possibility of any kind of charge against the president moving forward. And the question I have for you is, after looking at this and after seeing Corey Lewandowski testify that he doesn't have to tell the truth to media outlets and regularly doesn't, as we found out, my question to you is, should CNN keep booking habitual, persistent, uncontrollable, malignant liars like Corey Lewandowski? Because on the one hand, you are legitimizing their lying by booking them after they say under oath, I lie to the media all the time, and then you reward them by giving them more publicity and booking them on your channel. On the other hand, the counter argument would be, Alisyn Camerota did make Corey Lewandowski look really dumb here, and maybe there is something to be gained, some net benefit from exposing them in this way. I'm opening up the question to you. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and this seems actually like a really great topic for an upcoming Twitch stream. Please follow me at twitch.tv/David Pakman. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription already, you can subscribe free to you to my Twitch channel with Twitch Prime. Costs you nothing, but it counts as a paid subscription for me. Twitch.tv/David Pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Antoinette Coble and Norman Ernst. Antoinette and Norman, really appreciate your support. Membership is our primary funding source. There's no money raining down from big corporations or anything like that. It's folks like you who say, hey, you know what? I like the David Pakman Show podcast. I like the David Pakman Show radio show, TV show, YouTube channel. I'm going to go to joinpakman.com and support it directly. Also want to say thanks today to today's longtime sustaining member of the day, Stephanie Sliz, who has been with us for almost 5 years. Great to have you, Stephanie, and really appreciate 5 years of support. The David Pakman Show subreddit is a place where more than 14,000 of our viewers and listeners are regularly participating in respectful and substantive political discussions. You can find it at davidpakman.com/Reddit. A few posts from today that I want to call to your attention. A user named The Goat of Goats 999 says, what's wrong with a public option? Don't most countries with universal health care also allow private insurance? So this is a very reasonable question, and there's a couple things that are being mixed here. If you have universal health care, it doesn't necessarily follow that you make private insurance illegal. In fact, I don't think that should be a priority. Let private insurance exist. If the nationalize the universal healthcare system, Medicare for all or whatever else, is good enough, people are going to prefer it over private insurance. And this will naturally, as the free marketers like to say, it will naturally do what needs to happen to private insurance. A public option is something else. And studies have shown that public options would only lower premiums by about 7 to 8%. Which is marginal when it comes to the total lack of affordability of health insurance for so many people in this country. So I think it's important to distinguish that a public option is something that can exist without having any kind of universal health care or in addition to, and it is a separate question from whether private for-profit insurance should be allowed to exist even if something like Medicare for all is put in place. I happen to think the answer is yes, let it exist. Don't go through the hassle of saying we are going to make your business illegal. Things will just sort themselves out if Medicare for all or whatever government program is put in place is good enough, and people will decide what it is that they prefer. Another post from user Ryan Lindbergo about New Mexico rolling out a plan for tuition-free state college. We don't need to analyze the proposal specifically, but I think that on both single-payer healthcare and tuition and dealing with homelessness, I am very much in favor of states piloting programs on their own. You will often hear a talking point from the right on all of these social program proposals, healthcare, whatever the case is, that it would not work in the United States. It works in small European countries because they are small. And sometimes they say that it works because the countries are homogenous, although it doesn't make any sense with regard to a lot of these programs. A story for a different day. I think it would be great for states to pilot some of these programs. There are many U.S. states with higher populations and larger land masses than many European countries, and they would serve as great proving grounds. Unfortunately, Vermont's single-payer attempt did not end up happening, but I would love to see New Mexico do tuition-free college. I would love for any state to show the viability of these programs and also the economic benefits that they would bring with them. A user on the subreddit named Hollowbrine found the David Pakman Show on TikTok. Yeah, so listen, I like to sample different platforms because you never know what could be the next Instagram or the next big thing. And we've tried things out on the show that don't go anywhere, and that's okay. We just stop them and then we try something else. And then some of the things we try work really well. YouTube being one example, the show Instagram page being another example. So after reading a lot about this new platform called TikTok, we created a David Pakman Show account there. We've only posted one video so far. We've only got like 5 followers there so far, but I actually think there could be something to this platform, and I like to try to be an early adopter of a lot of these things. So find us on TikTok. Send me ideas about what we should even be doing there. We're just learning about the platform and figuring it out. Join the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. More than 14,000 of you already have, and a great source of political discussion, respectful debate, story ideas for the show. Look forward to seeing you there. We are once again faced with the combination of ignorance and arrogance from Donald Trump, and it's always a perfect storm of what I call weaponized ignorance around the economy specifically. Remember when Donald Trump called now criminal National Security Advisor Michael Flynn in the middle of the night to ask him, hey, is a strong dollar or a weak dollar better for the American economy? Donald Trump dealing with the economy is sort of like you realize your car needs the transmission rebuilt, and you bring it to a guy who only knows how to diagnose whether the car is out of gas or not, and often even diagnoses that incorrectly. You're not even going to be able to assess the transmission with the guy who can only read the gas reading, and that is similar to what is going on with Donald Trump in the American economy. Maybe a better analogy is your engine blows and you bring the car to a bakery. The baker is equivalent to Donald Trump dealing with the economy. It was a signal when Trump called Michael Flynn and said, is a strong dollar or weak dollar good, that this is not a guy who knows anything about the economy. And Donald Trump tweeting yesterday, quote, Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve fail again. No guts, no sense, no vision, a terrible communicator. So to really do this correctly, we've got to go through it sequentially. Donald Trump has continued to just rage over the idea that the economy would be doing way better today if the Federal Reserve would help him out with more and bigger federal funds rate cuts in the way that Trump believes they've, quote, helped out previous presidents. Now, Donald Trump has gotten 2 rate cuts recently. I believe it was August 1st. He got a 25 basis point cut around August 1st. Don't remember the exact date. And then he got another 25 basis point cut yesterday. 25 basis points is like 0.25%. But Trump is insisting it's just not enough. And the truth is that both increases and decreases to the federal funds rate can, quote, help a president, because the logic is if you cut the federal funds rate, it makes it cheaper for banks to borrow money, and that can conceivably stimulate economic activity, and that will boost the stock market, and it will give something to Donald Trump to brag about how great the economy is doing. But when the federal funds rate is increased, it can also help the economy in that the Fed must see the economy as being strong enough to tolerate a rate increase, signaling that things must be going pretty well. So first of all, it's not even cut and dry that only rate cuts help a president look better in terms of the economy that they are stewards of. But to analyze this outlandish behavior by Donald Trump, you also have to dig deeper about, in the modern economy, does a rate cut even really do the things that we historically believed rate cuts would do? And the answer is only sort of. The mechanism that is imagined for a rate cut to help the economy is the Federal Reserve cuts the rate. This leads to Americans buying more durable goods like cars and stuff like that. Interest rates drop on mortgages, so people will buy houses. They will refinance mortgages and save money and have some extra money every month to spend on other stuff. But the reality is that as the economy continues to modernize, the reality is a federal funds rate cut of 25 or 50 basis points is not going to have that significant an effect. People aren't saving up, waiting for a rate cut, and then they go out and they get a car and a house and refinance. Spending has much more of a natural cycle that's related to where in life people are and other factors. And in addition to that, you've got to remember that the bottom half of the economy has had stagnant wages for like 40 years. So a 25 basis point cut or a 50 basis point cut or a 75 basis point cut is not going to stimulate any significant amount of spending for a lot of those people. They just don't have any money. So the long and short of it is that even this reliance on rate cuts to, quote, jumpstart an economy or to prevent a recession, it's old thinking. It's, of course, based on the sort of economic status quo that has not been good for half of the country anyway. That's a bigger conversation. And of course, Donald Trump is furious not only about only getting another 25 basis points, he's furious that the Fed is predicting GDP growth of only 2.2% this year. Remember, he was promising 3, 4, I think he even talked about 5% GDP growth under his presidency. Of course, it's not happening. It was never going to happen. And sadly, the Trump stuff around this is a really big distraction from some bigger economic questions that we don't have answers to. Trump is flat out wrong about the federal funds rate. Trump is attacking the Federal Reserve chief that he selected, Jerome Powell. I mean, it's crazy, but it's a distraction from what happens to the economy if we don't deal with climate change. Isn't an economy that is based on infinite growth on a planet of limited resources fundamentally a mathematical impossibility? How good is an economy really, even if the stock market is high or unemployment is low, if half the country can't afford an unexpected $400 expense or is one illness away from bankruptcy? There are really important questions to solve about the economy, some of which we're going to talk with progressive economist Dean Baker later on today, which I really look forward to. Donald Trump doesn't even understand the problems, never mind potential solutions. And that's probably the biggest tragedy of all of this. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me at david.pakman. People loving the picture I posted with my dad's dog yesterday. Nemo, the English lab, who has gone gray. He has a gray beard now, not me, the dog. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Follow the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Dean Baker, who's a senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, also a visiting professor at the University of Utah. So great to talk to you, Dean.
It's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
So to start with, there's so many areas I'm curious about your take on that are relevant to sort of recent political economic discussions. We could talk about automation. There's the debt and deficit football that is often in the news. There is the discussion of are we heading towards a recession and how would we know when we are in it? But maybe to figure out what you think might be most productive, is there a particular area where you believe that the sort of corporate mainstream discussion and framing of an economic topic is just way off, where we need to like completely realign even how we're thinking of the parameters of the debate?
Yeah, there actually is. It's an area that I worked on kind of as a spare time thing for really decades. And this is patent and copyrights. That's going to sound obscure to people, and that's a big problem because patents and copyrights are hugely important in the economy. And just to put it as simply as possible, there's a very commonly held view, certainly among economists and people in policy discussions, that technology is responsible, or at least partly responsible, for upward redistribution of income. So the idea is that you have these people in STEM, people who do computer work, or you could point to a Bill Gates, they get really rich, and it's just because of technology. And then you have the people who have less education, we'll say people will use college degrees as a cutoff. That's still about 2/3 of the workforce who don't have college degrees. And they end up as being losers. So a classic story, someone working on the assembly line at UAW in an auto factory, that used to be a good paying job. You could support a family on it. You have healthcare insurance, a pension. Well, those jobs just aren't that valuable anymore. And the story goes, this is, I might say it's unfortunate, it's technology. And the point about patents and copyrights those are government policies. And those determine who are the winners, who get the benefits from technology. And just to go back to our friend Bill Gates is incredibly rich because he has copyrights, patents also, on Microsoft software. The government will arrest people who use Microsoft software without his permission. Now, that is a policy. It obviously serves a purpose. We have patents, we have copyrights, provide incentive for innovation, incentive for creative work, but that's a policy to do it. And the point is, they could be stronger, they could be weaker, they could be shorter. We could have weaker penalties, stronger penalties for violating them. And there are alternatives. We already fund an awful lot of creative, innovative work, and most importantly, National Institutes of Health. We could fund more that way.
So Dean, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. There's this idea when we talk about tech jobs for people with or without college degrees, the sort of potential of these different types of jobs. And very often the sort of fate of those decisions is maybe too much attributed to the choices that the individual makes about going or not going to college, the type of field that they want to work in. But what you're saying is that with regard to the technology, the potential of technology jobs, that rather than being a sort of virtue of the decisions made by the individual, it's the framework established around intellectual property by the government that has kind of created this environment to begin with.
Exactly. So the fact that there's a lot of money in the tech sector, that's a policy decision. And again, you could even say it's a good policy decision. That's fine. But the point was, this didn't just happen. So when we get all these people sort of going, we really feel bad for those people who are left behind, you go, well, they weren't left behind. We pushed them behind.
I'm curious about, okay, here's an example question that's often asked that we could either answer as asked, or we could point out that the framing is the wrong framing. So there's this question of the gap between CEO pay and average worker pay at corporations. If I ask my former University of Massachusetts economic professor Richard Wolff about what is the correct ratio between CEO pay and average worker pay, he would say the entire system is screwed up. We need to be looking at democratizing the workplace. He would have a systemic critique rather than one of just saying, well, it should be limited to like 100x or something like that. How does someone like you approach a question like that of CEO pay to average worker pay?
Well, I'm fine with the more systemic critique. I'd be fine with having workers have more say in the way companies are run and everything. Yeah. But I think there's an important misconception about the current system that, I sort of say, I guess my view is always, if you can't take small steps, the idea you're somehow going to take a big leap is, at least to me, fairly unlikely. So one of the points I've made about CEO pay is it's coming at the expense of shareholders. So there was a big deal made about a month or so ago, the Business Roundtable that includes all the major companies, JP Morgan's in there and Bill Gates and Microsoft, all the big companies are in there. They said, we should no longer be concerned with just maximizing shareholder value. We have to be concerned about our workers, about the environment, about the community, which you go, okay, those are all good things. But the point I made was, you were not just concerned about maximizing shareholder value. You were concerned about maximizing CEO pay. CEO pay has gone up 940% over the last 4 decades. And, guess what? Returns to shareholders over the last 2 decades actually have been very poor by historic standards. You could argue what they should get. I mean, that's open question. But the point is, returns to shareholders in the last 2 decades have actually been really weak by historic standards. So if they've been maximizing shareholder value, they do a really bad job of it. So my point is that what's going on with CEOs is that basically they're ripping off their shareholders, and that's because of the structure of corporate governance. The people who determine their pay are their boards of directors, who are most immediately responsive to the CEOs. So again, I'd be happy to see workers have more say in the way corporations are run, but I would just settle for having shareholders have more say in the way corporations are run, because CEOs would get an awful lot less money And that affects the distribution of wages up and down the economy. Because if the CEO is getting 20 million, in many cases they are, person right underneath them, the chief financial officer, the other top people, they're probably getting 10, 12 million. The third tier is getting 2 or 3 million. And back where I learned my arithmetic, if those people are getting more, everyone else must be getting less, because that's taking a big chunk of the corporate pie.
You said something at the beginning of this topic, which is if we can't take small steps, it's not totally logical to think that we could take the really big steps. And this is a conversation I've had very often as someone myself who identifies as a social democrat with those who designate themselves as socialists, who want socialization of the means of production and want to go way further than I want to go. And I've pointed out, it seems to me that in the immediate, what you want is not even a possibility, and that what you want is only going to happen if we first get to what I want. So really, we should be working together rather than disagreeing about what the end point is. Is that a reasonably pragmatic in your mind when it comes to a lot of these economic questions, or am I maybe missing some other component here?
I think that's very, very much on the mark, because the reality is we could all think of, sort of grand visions that we would like to see the world look like, but those are going to be really, really hard to get to. And if all we're thinking of is the grand vision, well, odds are we're not going to make any progress. And, people are living their lives. And if they go without health care, that's a really big deal. So we could have our grand vision, but they're not getting health care. If we're not doing anything to address climate change, again, we could have our grand vision of what the world should look like. But, if we're obsessed with them, we're not thinking, okay, what can we do tomorrow? What can we do that's going to have an impact? Now, ideally, you have a longer term strategy. So you aren't just doing things randomly like, oh, this is a good thing to do tomorrow, and then, well, something else to do the next day. You do have some framework in which these steps make sense. But to just say, oh, I have my grand vision, end of story, well, then you're going to be talking about your grand vision and basically doing nothing.
I guess to defend the view of those who have a more, you might have to tear it down to build it back up the right way mentality, they would maybe argue that when you look at some of the major economic issues, including, for example, inequality, the disproportionate power of corporations over our daily lives in endless different ways, when you ask what are the really big issues here, it's not crazy to think that unless you really do away with the power structures that got us to where we are, we will never have the bigger change. And maybe that's how someone would defend focusing on the grand vision rather than what we can do right now.
Well, I have to say that one really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the idea is somehow we're going to have it all come crashing down. I mean, that's I'm sorry, I just think that's crazy wishful thinking. And, at the end of the day, that means we're not doing anything, that we're not addressing really important issues, so we're going to hope it keeps it will come crashing down. In the meantime, we're going to destroy the planet with, throwing out so much greenhouse gas emissions that, I'm not going to say it's never irreversible, but it will devastate, life as we know it. That doesn't make sense to me.
When it comes to the discussions of recession, what is your barometer for determining if an economy is in a recession? Is it that important to make that determination in any kind of definitive way? If qualitatively you can identify things that are going well and things that are not going so well, what's your general sense of the way that discussion has been carried out?
Well, the conventional view of recession, 2 quarters of negative growth, that's not 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. That's not rigorously defined. I mean, in other words, the 2001 recession, we actually didn't have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But in any case, to my view, whether we're technically in a recession or not may at the end of the day not be that important, because the big issues are things like, well, basically, do people have jobs? Are people seeing rising real wages? Do people feel they can quit their job if they don't like it? Because there's a strong labor market, they can quit their job and get another job somewhere else. Those are what I think of as big things. And right now, the economy, the labor market looks reasonably good. If it weakens, if we start to see the unemployment rate go up a lot and we start to see wages slow, that's a big problem, whether or not we're in a recession. So whether we could technically say, okay, negative growth, it's a recession, that won't matter if it turns out to be the case that the unemployment rate's rising and workers lose their ability to secure wage gains.
There's this indicator that I've looked a little bit at, which is kind of a proxy indicator to what may be coming, which is the percentage of people who are 90 days or more behind on car payments. The idea being that one's ability to stay current on car payments relates to a lot of other elements of the economy, being able to get to work, which often depends on that job, and that there may be some reasonable way in which it's a proxy indicator to what may be upcoming. Whether or not you want to comment on that particular metric, do you believe that there are advanced measures, advanced metrics that are more relevant to figuring out whether a recession is coming than others? Or is anybody who's telling you these are the three things you want to look at oversimplifying?
Well, when I look back at the recessions post World War II, there are common features. There are basically two stories with post World War II recessions. One is that we start to see higher inflation. The Fed raises interest rates to counter that, tries to slow the economy, and they go too far. So when they raise rates, that causes people to buy fewer cars, buy fewer houses. They stop refinancing mortgages. All those things dampen growth, and if they go too far, then it gives you a recession. The other way you get a recession is when a bubble bursts, and that's of course what happened in 2008, 2009, where the housing bubble burst and gave us a very severe recession. That was also really the story of the 2001 recession, that we had the stock bubble burst. And technically, that's not considered a serious recession. I consider it a bad one because if you look at the labor market, we continue to lose jobs. The recession officially ends in December of 2001. We continue to lose jobs all through 2002 and most of the way through 2003. And we didn't get back the jobs we lost until January of 2005. So to my view, that was a serious recession. But long and short, when we're looking for cues, advance warning, the two stories: one, do we have a bubble that's about to burst? And for that, I don't see any bubbles that are driving the economy. And I did see both the stock bubble and housing bubble. So, I do look for things like that. I don't see anything there now. The other story is the Fed raising interest rates aggressively. Well, we never got the interest rate all that high. I know Donald Trump was yelling about it, but the Fed's interest rate never got above 2.5%. They've just lowered it twice. I don't see either story of a recession. So the classic causality for a recession, the Fed or a bursting bubble, it's just not there. So I really don't see one on the horizon.
Looking forward, the topic of automation is getting more and more attention when it comes to the presidential race. It's been mostly Andrew Yang who has been talking about it. And I've read some pieces saying that this is an overblown fear, that in the same way that in the past technology has destroyed some jobs and industries but always created more, that will continue to happen. On the other hand, there are papers I've read which say the rate at which that has happened in the past is changing, and over time, technology will destroy more jobs than the number it creates. Possible to know that at this point in time? What's your sense of the importance of this automation issue?
Well, what I find ironic, and I just did a little paper looking at productivity and the share portion of productivity growth that's going to workers, and first point out is we're actually in a period of extraordinarily weak productivity growth. So for all the talk of automation, if you actually look at the data, we're actually losing jobs to technology at a historically low rate. And I know all these people, I know a lot of people push that argument. They go, oh, we have all this great technology. And maybe it is great, but the fact is it's not affecting the economy. So the idea that we're about to lose all these jobs to technology, I just see basically zero basis for that. And if it did happen, if we were to see a more rapid rate of productivity growth, that would be great. That would create a possibility of more rapid wage growth. We could work fewer hours. This is a story with basically no reality whatsoever to it. So it's not one of the things that keeps me up at night.
What is the thing that keeps you up at night when it comes to the economy?
Well, I'd have to say with the economy, I don't know whether you want to call it the economy or not. Global warming is a huge, huge issue. And, we're doing nothing on it. Donald Trump seems to think it's a good thing to throw as much greenhouse gases into the environment as possible. And unfortunately, the U.S. is still such a big actor in the world that if we just ignore any efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it makes it a really big problem. And of course, it makes, other countries, obviously are looking to us, and not, you could say as a leader. But the other point is, well, if we're out there spewing as much greenhouse gases as we can into the atmosphere, probably doesn't make sense for, France or Germany or UK to do anything, because it won't matter. So that is, to my view, far and away the most pressing thing. And I'm hugely concerned about inequality. And, what bothers me is we don't discuss the issue the right way. I was going on about patents and copyrights. I raised this with Economist, and they look at me blank-faced. And it's not that I think economists are brilliant people, but this is their topic. And the idea that we can't, they'll give me this story about, upward redistribution of income. That's unfortunate, but that's just technology. And they go, well, suppose we didn't have patents and copyrights. And then look at me. Well, if we didn't have patents and copyrights, we'd have no incentive. I go, okay, fine. But then you just told me that's a policy. So, but anyhow, there's a tendency just to treat it as this blob that like, oh, we have inequality and it's really unfortunate. Even people on the left, I mean, they want to have progressive taxes, which I think are great, but they treat the underlying cause of inequality as being something that's intrinsic to the market, as opposed it was how we structured the market.
Yeah, and it's amazing how, I mean, when you talk about economics, invariably climate change comes up. When you talk about national security, invariably climate change comes up, and it's an issue with far-reaching tentacles for sure. We've been speaking with economist Dean Baker, who's a senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, also a visiting professor at the University of Utah. Dean, I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks a lot for having me on. I really enjoyed the discussion.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Left-wing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is embroiled in a bit of a scandal after some pictures went public of him wearing blackface when he was in his late 20s. In one picture, Trudeau is wearing very, very dark makeup on his entire face and neck at an Arabian-themed nights party at the West Point Grey Academy, where he was teaching at the time. There's another picture in which Trudeau is wearing a less extreme version of the blackface during a high school talent show in which he sang a Jamaican folk song. So let's discuss this. Conservatives obviously are just falling all over themselves to attack the left of being hypocrites. Oh, when a right-winger wears blackface, they have to be destroyed, according to the left. But when a left-winger wears blackface, it's no big deal. Now, of course, this just isn't true. My analysis is the same on blackface no matter who did it. I don't care if it's Megyn Kelly defending blackface or Justin Trudeau wearing blackface or whatever the case may be. It's not okay. Blackface has a horrible racist past. You can debate, oh, it's for comedy or whatever. And then we get into that conversation about what can just be excused away as it being for comedic purposes, but there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It doesn't matter who did it. Blackface is not okay. The differences start to show up not in our analysis, but in the person who did its reaction to the blackface. And Justin Trudeau has immediately apologized with no caveats, period. Not, I apologize if anybody was offended, right? That bull, you know what it is. That BS thing. Almost forgot I was on broadcast radio and TV there. That BS thing about if anyone was offended, I apologize. Justin Trudeau saying, quote, I shouldn't have done that. I should have known better, and I didn't. I'm really sorry. This is what's called a real apology. When he was asked if he thought that the photograph was racist, he said, yes, it was. I didn't consider it racist at the time, but now we know better. So one set of very clear differences between some instances of blackface and other instances of blackface is the reaction from the person involved or the person commenting. You might remember former Fox News host, and is she former NBC? Has she completely been let go from NBC, or is she just in a reduced role? Megyn Kelly said on that really wacky daytime NBC show she had for a little while, what's the big deal with blackface anyway? Sort of like reminiscing nostalgically about the era of blackface. That is very different from Justin Trudeau saying this was wrong. Even if I didn't recognize it as racist at the time, it's racist. No excuses. I'm sorry. So that is one major difference. Number two, I do believe that it matters when the person can credibly say, This was a mistake. Blackface is racist, but there's no link whatsoever to my policies as an elected official, versus a politician who was not only caught wearing blackface, but also supports racist policies, has a history of saying racist things, whatever. So it's not about, if the person is on the left, we treat them differently than if the person is on the right. It's just wrong. It's wrong, period. And there should be apologies with no caveats whatsoever. But there is a difference between someone who defends having worn blackface and perpetuates racist policies versus someone who doesn't and says it was completely wrong. Now, either way, this is not good for Justin Trudeau. There's no question about that. He actually has sort of what I think of as a bigger scandal that could be an impediment to his reelection in October's Canadian election, which is that he is accused of having pressured a prosecution to be dropped, which would be really, really bad. And by the way, the timing of the blackface thing, clearly someone had this for a long time. These were not pictures that were buried in some way and not available. Clearly, the timing of the release has been calculated. It doesn't make the blackface anything different than what it is, which is wrong. Not a defense of the blackface, but this isn't a yearbook that's been around forever. Clearly, this could have come out any time. And the timing, just literally a month ahead of the October 21st Canadian elections, we'll see what effect it has, and we will follow what happens with our friendly neighbors to the north. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We often talk about the lower age limit to be president of the United States. You can't be 17 and be president. You can't be 21 and be president. Okay. This caller has a question about a different sort of age limit, an upper age limit on the presidency.
David, this is Dave from California. I want to ask your viewers a question. And it's a good question.
Oh, well, I'll be the judge of that.
Should there be an age limit if you're going to be elected president of the United States? Former President Jimmy Carter thinks there should be an age limit. I think there should be an age limit. Only because the job is so tough. You know what I mean? It could be so tough. So I think electing 70-year-olds maybe just a little too old. But I could be wrong. But I think that would be something to do a poll on. Bye.
All right. Well, the caller, very, very confident that it is a good question and telling me that a poll should be done. But so here's the thing. I am open to the idea of an upper age limit to the presidency. But as I talked about several weeks ago, what about not setting an upper age limit, but just requiring in some way that candidates take a cognitive assessment, a real one, not the Montreal cognitive assessment, but an actual proper cognitive assessment. And when I suggested that a few weeks ago, some people wrote in saying that it is ageist to only require people of a certain age to take the cognitive assessment. I mean, I have no problem just saying any major party nominee should agree, regardless of their age, to take a cognitive assessment. That may circumvent some of the difficulties of setting an upper age limit on the presidency. I am not against it in principle. I just think that the application, the concern about ageism, anytime you're talking about age limits for anything, anytime you're talking about after a certain age, you have to be retested to maintain your driver's license, for example. If it is based on age, you are always opening yourself up to the possibility that it could be deemed ageist. The question is, what science backs up whatever it is that we are trying to implement or put in place? And can it be applied in a way where even if the concern is about people of a certain age, you are still at least applying it in a way that is equal under the law when it comes to age? And I think the answer is we could if we decided that this was a priority. Now, from a practical perspective, I don't know that this really is a priority that is going to make its way, maybe not even into the law, but just into tradition, as something like releasing your tax returns has become mostly tradition, which Donald Trump decided to ignore. But I think that there's definitely an interesting conversation to be had. On today's bonus show, the U.S. abortion rate is at its lowest ever. The pro-life right is saying it is abortion bans that have been the cause of that. I disagree. Studies disagree. We will talk about that on the bonus show. I will also talk about Joe Kennedy formally announcing that he is going to be running for Senate. And lastly, Burger King, not only now offering the Impossible Burger, I believe it's called, they also in the UK are getting rid of all of those plastic toys from kids' meals for environmental reasons. We will talk about, is it possible that these fast food chains will become the good guy at some point? All of those stories and more on the bonus show. 2 ways to get access: become a member at joinpacman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.